On today's episode, I'll be talking about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2.
If you're looking for a man with no plans or programs, and he always leaves a chance to hold hands for romance. Are you looking for the Luke with an old man, a cold hands? It's a creature of the night who heads for his spotlight. I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews, covering one unsystematically chosen topic at a time. If you like listening to a guy recap and review movies in weekly episodes, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. As I mentioned, today's movie is Spider-Man 2. This movie is based on comics and characters originally created by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, and draws on the Amazing Spider-Man number 50 story subtitled Spider-Man No More by Stan Lee. Released on June 30th, 2004, with a runtime of 127 minutes, this movie is rated PG-13 by the Motion Picture Association of America. Budget, $200 million. Directed by Sam Raimi, who also directed the Evil Dead movies that I'm just kind of meh on. I don't really care about the Evil Dead movies. The whole franchise is just a take it or leave it for me. I just can't get that excited for them, but they're cult classics. They're really beloved, and they were initially very low budget, and Sam Raimi really made a name for himself off of them. He also directed a movie called Darkman with Liam Neeson, which is a superhero story that is not based on a comic book, and I think I started that one and never actually finished it, but I didn't think it was particularly great. And he also directed The Quick and the Dead with Sharon Stone and a young Leonardo DiCaprio, and there's a lot of good people in that movie, and I still haven't gotten around to seeing it. I've heard mixed things, but I feel like I've almost got to check it out. For the writers, this movie went through a ton of draftings and whatnot, basically just rewrites and whatnot. So I want to make sure that I cover all of these accurately. So Alfred Goff and Miles Miller wrote the initial workup of this script, this draft, and they also wrote Shanghai Noon, which I actually never saw, but I'm not opposed to seeing. It's got Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson in it, and it seems like it could be a pretty enjoyable movie. It was kind of capitalizing on the success of the Rush Hour, I think the first movie. I don't know if the second one had come out by the time that came out. They also wrote on Smallville, some number of episodes. I don't know how many, but I've watched Smallville and I actually enjoy it, despite the fact that I've never sat down and made an attempt to watch it from the start and actually binge the whole thing. And they also wrote Beetlejuice, which is the second movie in the Beetlejuice franchise. It's a legacy sequel, and I was never huge. People give me crap about this all the time, but other than his Batman movies, I'm not a particularly big fan of Tim Burton in general, honestly. Then there was another round of drafts that was rewritten by Michael Chabon. I hope that's pronounced correctly. He wrote the movie John Carter, which I believe was made by Disney Studios, but this movie, I've never seen it. I've only ever heard about it. Apparently, it is one of the biggest flops of all time. It was like this super high budget, and it just failed so hard critically and commercially that it's just unbelievable. Like, it's notorious as being, I think for a while it was the biggest flop, and then since then I think other things have maybe bested it, but not by much, honestly. It was like they were trying to really start a whole franchise with it, and it just fucking fell flat on its face. And he also wrote on the Netflix miniseries Unbelievable, which is about a woman who is accused of falsifying rape claims. And basically, the whole point of the entire show is to get to the bottom of whether or not what she's saying is true. And then, last but not least, for the writers, Alvin Sargent is the guy who basically took all of the existing drafts and went through it with Sam Raimi and pieced it all together and kind of transformed it into a coherent story that combined all of these random elements. He also wrote on the movie Paper Moon. I think that came out in the 70s, even though it's black and white. And I remember really enjoying that movie. I want to say it's like a father-daughter tale of like them being grifters or swindlers or whatever you want to call them. And basically it's just a really amusing movie. It's got Tatum O'Neal and Ryan O'Neal in it, and I think it won Best Picture even. He also wrote What About Bob with Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss, and I've heard that Bill Murray is particularly hard to work with, or has been historically. And actually, I think I heard Richard Dreyfuss legitimately wanted to kill Bill Murray by the end of shooting this movie, which is great because that's kind of the point of Bill Murray's character in What About Bob is he is Bob, and he is just very annoying and unpleasant to be around, and Richard Dreyfuss's character is basically supposed to hate him. And just a little side note, Alvin Sargent also wrote Spider-Man 3, which is the final installment of this trilogy. And he also supposedly wrote some capacity on The Amazing Spider-Man when they rebooted this franchise like hilariously quickly after the third movie came out from this trilogy because they had to retain the rights. And also, I guess they just felt like they really wanted to redo it, even though they did a pretty decent job the first time around, at least with the first couple of movies. For the composer, we have Danny Elfman, who did the score, of course. He has notoriously worked with Tim Burton a lot. He's done most of Tim Burton's movies, and he just has these really cool, dark scores. He did Batman from 1989, most notably for me, and he did the original Mission Impossible movie. I don't know if he actually did any of the other Mission Impossible movies after that. Couldn't tell you, didn't bother to look it up. And he also did the Simpsons theme, which is a thing that I think I've heard he actually decided to like do more TV work, because if he did the themes for TV shows and stuff, he could actually get longer lasting residual checks and, you know, royalties from his work. So he was initially reluctant to do the Simpsons theme, and then he did it, and it really worked out well for him. For the cast, we have Tobey Maguire, who plays Peter Parker / Spider-Man, of course. He was in Pleasantville, which I think was late 90s. I want to say maybe 98. I don't think it was into the 2000s yet. That one he stars in with Reese Witherspoon. It's about this old TV show that's one of these like yuppie type shows that everything perfect happens all the time, and there's not really a ton of significant conflict in the characters' lives. It's a very interesting movie. I don't know that it's like particularly great, but I do remember enjoying it okay. He was also in The Cider House Rules with, I think, Michael Caine. I've seen that movie once, and I honestly could not tell you one thing about the movie, really. Maybe I want to say Tobey Maguire goes to stay at this place that makes cider, maybe? I can't. Honestly, I'm just spitballing here. I can't remember at all. And he was also in the movie Seabiscuit just before this movie. He shot that between the first and second Spider-Man movies, and I've seen that one too. Not really my kind of movie, even though actually it is usually my kind of movie. It was just, it did not land for me like I wanted it to. I really enjoy dramatized true stories, but that one was just kind of fell flat. Then we have Kirsten Dunst, who I have noted here is hot, and she was in Spider-Man 1 through 3. She's in all 3 of these movies. She was also in the movie Bring It On. Oh, I'm sorry. She plays Mary Jane Watson, by the way. I should have mentioned that. She was in the movie Bring It On, which is a teen movie from, I want to say it was like 2000, and it's like a cheerleading movie, teen movie. It has been parodied endlessly, and I think I've seen it before, and it's legitimately of its time, and it really was pretty popular, I think, and it spawned a bunch of straight-to-video sequels. And she was also in a movie called Upside Down with, I think it's Jim Sturgis is the actor's name. He's a British actor, and it's a really interesting concept for a movie. I don't know that they executed it particularly well, but it was pretty interesting. Alfred Molina plays Dr. Otto Octavius, or Dr. Octopus, or Doc Ock for short. He has a very short scene, but very memorable scene in the movie Boogie Nights, and I honestly love Boogie Nights, and I intend to cover it on this podcast one day in the near future, but I probably will have to have at least one guest for that episode. He was in Raiders of the Lost Ark in a very small part in the very beginning of the movie, and honestly, I didn't even realize it was him until I looked it up and realized that that was him. And he was in the movie Magnolia, which is another P.T. Anderson movie like Boogie Nights, but I've never gotten around to seeing that, even though I have it on digital and really intend to watch it sometime. I just don't know when. James Franco plays Harry Osborn, and he made a name for himself on the Judd Apatow dramedy Freaks and Geeks from, I think it's 99 and 2000, I want to say was when that first and only season was. He was in The Pineapple Express with Seth Rogen, and honestly, I was never a big enough stoner to have ever enjoyed that movie as well as the people who enjoy it do. I get so fucking tired of the drug shit, especially, like, I've said this before, but like, Seth Rogen loves to do the trope of like, oh, this person took drugs and they didn't realize it, or this person took far more drugs than they realized and they're having a bad experience with it. And that's like his biggest shtick in comedy, is doing that trope over and over again, and it's so annoying. I still like Seth Rogen, I hate that trope now. And James Franco is also in 127 Hours, which is a true story about a man who is out hiking in the desert and falls into a crevasse, and his arm ends up getting trapped in the rock formation. And it's a very exciting and tense story. I've seen it once, and probably that's all you really need to see it. I would not recommend going out and buying 127 Hours, because it's just not a movie that you need to go back and rewatch multiple times. Like, you get the gist of it the first time through. Rosemary Harris plays Aunt May, who is Peter Parker's Aunt May, to be clear. She is in all three of these Spider-Man movies, and she was also in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, which is a really solid movie with, I think it's Ethan Hawke, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Marissa Tomei is definitely in that movie because she has topless scenes and I kind of tend to remember it, but it's actually a really good movie, and that's just a little bonus that you get to see Marissa Tomei in it. I was kind of surprised I didn't recognize or remember Rosemary Harris from before the Spider-Man movies. Like, I don't know what she was really known for that got her cast in this movie, but it's very bizarre to look back at her filmography and see nothing that stands out as like, oh, she was that woman. Like, I would have thought when she was younger, maybe she was in movies and she would have been well known to me. I don't recognize her from anything. And then last but not least, we have the great J.K. Simmons, who plays J. Jonah Jameson. He is also in all three of these Spider-Man movies, and he actually makes a return to the franchise later on in the Tom Holland movies. I think he makes a brief appearance at the end of Spider-Man Far From Home with Tom Holland, and then he is full on in Spider-Man No Way Home. And it's, for some reason, so hard for me to remember the names of those movies because they did the home theme with those titles, and it's very bizarre to me because it doesn't resonate with me as like an actual, memorable title. He was also in Whiplash, which is a great fucking movie. Honestly, probably his crowning achievement. It's like he was made for the role he plays in that movie. He's fucking perfect in it. He is this overbearing music teacher who really lays into Miles Teller's character. And honestly, I don't know that anyone could have done the movie as well as he did it and had the amount of different aspects of the character captured like he did. Miles Teller, honestly, I love Miles Teller, but it could have been anybody that got cast in that movie. I don't think it would have been that hard to pull off that part. He was also in a movie called Juno, which is about a teenage girl who gets pregnant and wants to give up her child for adoption, and I saw that movie in theaters. Don't really need to go back and revisit it ever, but enough is enough. It's not my kind of movie, and it's overly deliberately emotional for no more than it really is. I don't really think it's worth getting that worked up about. And last but not least, he was also in La La Land, which is a movie I've seen, but I probably am guilty of not fully paying attention to it because generally that is not the kind of movie that I go for, but I love Ryan Gosling Gosling and Emma Stone. So I thought, oh, well, I gotta check this out because they're both in this. And it was nominated for Best Picture, I think. I think this is the one that they announced the wrong winner at the Oscars. And by the way, the Oscars are just terrible. Nobody ever wins that should win. It's always incredibly political. And until recently, they didn't even make all of the people who voted watch all of the movies that were nominated, which it's like, what are you even doing on the Academy casting your votes if you haven't seen all of the movies that you are voting for or against? Anywho, for casting notes, Tobey Maguire had originally signed a 3-film deal when he agreed to star in the first movie. However, he had a pre-existing back issue that gave him problems while shooting the movie Seabiscuit. When Sam Raimi heard that Maguire could be paralyzed if he injured his back while shooting a movie, Jake Gyllenhaal was cast to replace him. Eventually, Ronald Meyer, the head of Universal Studios at the time and father of Tobey Maguire's then girlfriend, intervened and helped him regain the role by undergoing physical exams and testing to ensure he was fit to play the role. Ed Harris, Chris Cooper, David Duchovny, and Christopher Walken were all considered for the role of Doc Ock. Alfred Molina was a fan of Marvel Comics before he was ultimately cast in this role, but he was not familiar with the Doc Ock character per se. And I do find it funny because they very much did not make a great effort to adhere too much to the comics with this character, because if I recall correctly, in the versions of the character I'm familiar with, which would be like the 90s Spider-Man animated series and the video games that spawned, as well as some of the comic books, I believe Otto Octavius is almost always a German guy, like a native German speaker, and he has a really thick German accent. And I think that they just wanted to stay away from that aspect of the character when they adapted it for this film. And it was probably a good call, because if he had a German accent, it would have made the whole character feel really cartoonish, in my opinion, but it is what it is. For the plot synopsis, as Peter Parker struggles with balancing his personal life against his duties as a crime fighter, a new villain who he previously idolized surfaces. For the tagline, this summer, a man will face his destiny. A hero will be revealed. And that is just, I don't even know what that means. Like, what are you talking about? It doesn't even really apply to this movie that well at all. It's just so confusing. Like, I'm so glad that taglines have become less and less of a thing over time. Alright guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this motherfucking movie. So, this movie kicks off with the opening credits, of course, but this sequence also features a bit of a recap of the first movie by way of some comic book-esque illustrations depicting those events. It's just stills. And I briefly considered actually recapping the first movie before I started in on this plot, but honestly, I did cover it in my first season in tandem with 2008's Iron Man. So if you really want to hear my version of the events in that movie, please just go back and listen to it. And I feel like if you're listening to this, you are familiar with what happens in the first movie, so you shouldn't feel so uninitiated. It cuts from the drawing of the final shot of Peter Parker at the end of the first movie to a picture of Mary Jane Watson, as portrayed by Kirsten Dunst. The picture turns out to actually be a billboard with her face on it. Now, I know a lot of people are not huge fans of the direction her character went in these 3 movies, mostly because she comes off as very unpleasant and selfish in regard to her relationship with Peter a lot of the time, especially in the third movie. But I actually don't think that's particularly fair, because if she weren't a fictional character, I think most people would understand her frustrations a lot better and empathize with her more. Through voiceover narration, Peter explains that Mary Jane is the woman he loves, but that he can never tell her this because he made a promise to himself that he would live his life of a responsibility instead of putting her life at risk. And basically he knows that, like in the events of the first movie, bad guys will always use her to get to him if they know about her, even though the logic there is deeply flawed because he remains friends with her, and it probably wouldn't be a huge leap to assume that he might at least be interested in her romantically if you weren't super sure. It cuts to Peter on a motorized pizza delivery scooter in New York City, almost running into his boss, Mr. Aziz, who is chastising him for being late all the time. Peter explains to him that he is sorry, and he uses the weird explanation of there having been a disturbance that preoccupied him from arriving on time. Mr. Aziz explains to him that an order came in 21 minutes ago, and that if Peter can't deliver it within 8 minutes, he will get no money from the order because he will be defaulting on the pizza shop's 29-minute guarantee. And the other critical detail in this moment of exposition is that the delivery is 42 blocks away, and this is Peter's last chance before he loses his job because it'll cost him this customer forever if he's late. Now, of course, because I am a resourceful and curious podcaster, I Googled this, and that works out to roughly 2.1 miles distance for that 42 blocks that he has to go, which is not actually as bad as I expected. Mr. Aziz instructs Peter to get the fuck out of there and deliver it because there's no time to waste, and Peter is just kind of like standing there staring at him still when he should be leaving, and Peter just kind of heads out and leaves, and it's kind of a lost cause though, because you just know there's no fucking way he is going to make this. Eventually, he runs into enough traffic that he has problems navigating, and he disappears inside of a building or behind a building briefly, and then reemerges with the stack of pizzas in hand in his Spider-Man costume, and he's like swinging out, and he begins swinging through the air with the pizzas bound together by bungee cords, and an onlooker who watched the moment unfold looks on in amazement before wrongly assuming that Spider-Man just stole those pizzas from that pizza delivery guy. And that kind of sets the tone for this movie because a lot of the plot of this movie has to do with the public opinion of Spider-Man and how he's often viewed negatively by the general population, despite a few pro-Spider-Man individuals here and there. At one point, he has to swing through and save some kids from getting hit by a freight truck and also give them a little pep talk before he swings away again. While he was dealing with the kids, his pizzas had landed or he placed them on the railing of a balcony, and a man who was standing outside on the balcony noticed them. And then when it cuts back to this guy, Spider-Man swings back through to snag the pizzas again, but the guy had already grabbed a single slice from one of these boxes somehow, and in what can only be described as a cartoonish moment, Spider-Man flies away with the boxes as the guy goes to take a bite of the slice, and a web shoots onto the slice and pulls the still intact pizza slice from the guy's hand. And despite all of the unhygienic ramifications of that having happened, Spider-Man elects to continue delivering the pizza, even with the one gross slice mixed in. Then, in the second cartoonish moment, in a matter of seconds, Peter inexplicably emerges from a broom closet in the building where he is supposed to be delivering this pizza, and it's just not really clear. He must have just come in from the roof, and I guess we're supposed to believe he somehow emerged in this closet. A secretary at a desk, played by Emily Deschanel, watches him as he gets out of the closet, struggles to put the brooms and mops back in their place, and does his best to close the door. He then walks up to her with the giant stack of pizza boxes still bungee corded together, and some are partially smashed, and he places them on the edge of the desk, and he declares that it's pizza time, and she looks over at the clock and notices it's past the guaranteed 29-minute time, and then she tells him that he's late and she's not paying for those pizzas. And you know what they say, forgiveness is divine, but never pay full price for pizza. And I want to have a little aside here because I do find both of the Deschanel sisters attractive, Zoe and Emily, and I'm always prepared to convince myself that the one I'm looking at the moment is more attractive than the other because I've never seen them together on screen that I can recall. Anywho, Peter walks away defeatedly in his helmet that he inexplicably somehow still has, and immediately it cuts to his boss, Mr. Aziz, screaming at him for his failure, and honestly, it probably seems like he's laying it on pretty thick, but if I were in Mr. Aziz's shoes, I would be so fucking over Peter's flighty bullshit. He explains to him that their guarantee is a promise, and he realizes that a promise probably means nothing to a guy like Peter, but to him, it's a serious thing, and he tells Peter that he's fired. Peter explains to Mr. Aziz that it's serious to him too, and he pleads with him to give him another chance, but Mr. Aziz just rips the pizza parlor's sticker off of Peter's helmet, and Peter has to just walk away and leave and accept his fate. Then it immediately cuts to J. Jonah Jameson at the Daily Bugle, also telling Peter that he's fired because he's disappointed with the quality and content of the pictures that he is submitting to him to get paid for. Basically, he's just giving him all of these awful photos that are supposed to be showing a softer side of New York City, like dogs catching frisbees and pigeons and people out and about. Peter explains that he was hoping Jameson would consider showing a softer side of New York, which is completely insane because, like, has he ever met J. Jonah Jameson before? That's not his fucking style at all. Jameson only wants pictures of Spider-Man, but Peter explains that Spider-Man will no longer allow Peter to take pictures of him because Jameson's articles have turned the entire city against him. Jameson states that he's very proud of that fact, and honestly, I don't know why J.K. Simmons' version of this character works so well, but it really does. I mean, I think it's really just a testament to how likable J.K. Simmons is. Despite the original character being, to my recollection, like completely humorless in the comics and animated series that preceded this entire scene is constantly woven with Jameson being funny as he's talking to Peter. Peter finally reveals that he does have a picture of Spider-Man and he hands it to Jameson, who promptly underassesses its quality so he can lowball Peter on his payment. But Peter comes back with double the figure that Jameson proposed, and Jameson agrees to the $300 that Peter suggests and decides to make it a front page image. Later on, it shows Peter on campus at whatever university he's supposed to be attending. In a very cliche moment, he drops all of his stuff on the sidewalk as he's walking, and in the most exaggerated way possible, everyone walking by starts bumping into him and ignoring him as they walk by and like hitting him with their purses and stuff. It's ridiculous. Which, whether you want to believe it or not, is just not something people actually do. Not even in high school are they actually this careless and callous with someone who is clearly just picking up their stuff that they drop. Somebody would have even just stopped to help him. I don't really care what anybody says. After he takes a significant amount of abuse, he stands up and begins walking again, only to run into his professor, Dr. Kurt Connors. Connors asks him where he's going, and Peter says that he's headed to his class, and the professor explains to him that his class is already over, and he points out that this should be obvious because he's the professor of that class and he's out on the campus and not in the classroom still. Peter explains that he wants to do better about attending class and he wants to be there, and Connors just flat out tells him that he should just be there then. Connors lectures him about how bad his grades are and how much his work seems to be slipping in the class, and that he still has a paper due and he needs to do well on it in order to even pass the class. Peter explains that he's intending to write the paper on renowned scientist Dr. Otto Octavius, who is a personal friend of Connors. And this is kind of a big criticism of so many things in the Sam Raimi trilogy, and honestly, probably Spider-Man in general, is that so many of the critical characters just happen to be so closely related to Peter Parker in whatever way they choose. It's like in the first one, the bad guy is Norman Osborn, who becomes the Green Goblin. And oh, wouldn't you know it, Norman also coincidentally is the father of Peter's best friend, Harry Osborn. In the third one, the villains are essentially Harry Osborn, who is attempting to take up the Goblin mantle from his father, Eddie Brock, who just happens to be a rival photographer at the Daily Bugle and is dating Peter's friend Gwen Stacy, and Flint Marko, who becomes the Sandman and is retconned for some reason into having been the guy who killed Peter's Uncle Ben. And I think it only stands out because it's so rare to see this in movies or stories even if they don't take place in an area as densely populated as New York City, where those kinds of personal connections are even less likely to occur. Like, I'm saying NYC is probably the last place that you would know that many people personally because there are so many people to know, and it would be a huge coincidence all the time. So, of course, Connors explains to Peter that he needs to do well on the paper or he will fail him, and he will know if the paper's not well done because of his personal friendship with Dr. Octavius. Peter arrives home that night and is greeted with a surprise party that is attended by Aunt May, Mary Jane, and Harry, and Peter asks what the occasion is, and Aunt May tells him that it's Peter's birthday because Peter is so busy all the time that he didn't even stop to notice it. Peter asks Mary Jane how her play is going, and Harry interjects to explain that she's brilliant in it, and she mentions that Harry sent her roses. Harry hassles Peter for not having returned his calls and then gets particularly critical as he suggests maybe he's been too busy taking pictures of Spider-Man, who, to be clear, Harry blames for the death of his father Norman because Harry doesn't realize what a psychopath Norman became before he died, and Norman made Peter swear to not tell Harry about what happened, even though it's like, why do you owe him that favor? Peter asks Harry about how things are going at Oscorp, and he explains that he has been working with, surprise, surprise, Dr. Otto Octavius on a breakthrough fusion project, who Harry knows is one of Peter's idols. Harry offers to introduce him to Octavius when Peter says that he's writing a paper on him, and as Mary Jane walks away to help Aunt May with her work in the kitchen, Harry insinuates to Peter that she's into him even though Peter says he doesn't have time for girls these days. I can't exactly remember how we left off in the first movie. Like, I know the movie ends basically with Mary Jane expressing her desire to be with Peter at Norman's funeral, and he shoots her down. But I think it's somewhere near the end of the second act in that movie where Harry sees Peter and Mary Jane adoringly holding hands at the hospital, and he just basically puts it together and assumes that she loves Peter and is no longer interested in him, even though they're dating. And we don't actually see like any official split up or anything. Like, it's not actually fully addressed. So I want to say that Harry and Mary Jane are only at this party as friends of Peter's, and Harry again hassles Peter for taking pictures of Spider-Man, and also mentions that he's taking Oscorp to levels his father never would have dreamed of. Peter tells Harry that he really wants the two of them to be able to trust each other, but Harry holds Peter's feet to the fire by asking him if he would even tell him if he knew who Spider-Man was in real life. Of course, Peter's silence in response to Harry's question speaks volumes, and Harry stands up and just turns away frustrated. That night after the party, Peter sees his aunt sleeping at the kitchen table and notices a foreclosure notice next to her. He wakes her up and mentions to her that he saw the notice from the bank, and she just says that she's a little behind on payments, just like everybody else is. But she clearly doesn't want to talk about it, and then she tries to give Peter some money because she knows that he's in a bad situation financially, and she begins crying as she insists that he take it and not leave it there because she knows he needs it. As the tears stream down her cheeks, she explains to Peter that she misses his Uncle Ben very much. Of course, Peter still has never told her that his actions indirectly caused his uncle's death at that wrestling match in the first movie when he deliberately chose not to stop a robber who ultimately left the venue and killed Uncle Ben before stealing his car. Of course, from the audience's perspective, I'm always conflicted about this dilemma that Peter finds himself in here, because even though it's pretty natural that he at least partially blames himself for not doing the right thing with the robber, knowing that with his powers he would have had no trouble stopping the guy, it's also not like he called out to the robber as the robber was running away that his Uncle Ben is downstairs waiting for him and that his car would be a good one to steal, or like he suggested that if Uncle Ben didn't readily surrender the car to him, that he should just fucking murder him in the street. Because obviously the person to blame for Uncle Ben's death is primarily the robber, like he's the guy that did it. But secondarily, I would blame Uncle Ben, because honestly, if somebody is armed and you are not armed and they're attempting to steal your vehicle, you should just give the vehicle up to them with no resistance at all. Then, of course, you should immediately go and report it to the police as soon as possible because, like, what the fuck was Ben expecting would happen? That this man brandishing a pistol and threatening him with it is just not gonna fucking do anything? No one in their right mind would criticize him for having complied with the man and let him take the car, even if he got away. But back to what I was saying, Aunt May is laying her guilt on Peter pretty thick without knowing it, and Peter is, of course, devastated to see what bad shape she's in. Peter is obviously pretty distraught, but he's clearly just not ready to fess up to his aunt about what really happened. He goes outside to take out the trash, and Mary Jane greets him from the porch of her old house. Peter says that he's seen her on a billboard in the city, and she says that it's all kind of embarrassing. She says that she misses seeing him, and he sort of reluctantly reciprocates the sentiment, but when she calls him on it and pressures him to elaborate, he deflects and just asks her where she's living now, instead of kindly telling her that he has admired her in a romantic way since they were school children, and something like, oh hey, would you like me to wife you up and maybe have my babies sometime? She knows he is clearly holding back feelings and she really doesn't know why, and she just seems at a loss for words. She tells him that he's such a mystery and puts her hand on his face and then just tells him happy birthday and starts to walk away. Then she casually mentions that she's seeing someone now and he asks her if she means like a boyfriend, and she just says, well, I like him, without really answering the question directly, even though it's like, yeah, of course she means a boyfriend. Who would say that they are involved with someone that they consider just a friend? And of course, in this moment, Peter has the world's worst poker face as he gets visibly upset to hear that Mary Jane might be involved with someone else. And it's like, bro, you don't get to be visibly upset about this to her if you are standing on principle and choosing not to profess your love to her because of your dual identities. Then he attempts to minimize her new relationship by suggesting that it might just be companionship, but she clarifies that it seems like it might be more than that. He tells her that he's going to go see her play the next night, and she reacts in disbelief and restrained optimism, and she tells him not to disappoint her, but you can bet your bottom dollar he's totally gonna. And honestly, the right move here is almost always not to get someone's hopes up if you know that there's a chance that you will not be able to follow through on what you're promising them. Like, for instance, if you're a manager and you've got a bunch of people working for you and you think that on the last day of the work week, you might want to let your employees go home early to get a head start on the weekend, maybe just keep that thought in the back of your head and just not tell them that that's a possibility, just in case it doesn't end up working out that way and something comes up. Then there's really no harm done, and they don't have to be pissed at you that you got them all worked up over nothing, because in reality, they had no expectation of it before, so it shouldn't really be a big deal. As Peter returns home to his apartment, he is stopped in the hall by his Russian landlord, Mr. Ditkovich, who happens to be an actor that I've seen in stuff, but I don't really know what. I just know his face. And the actor's name is Elya Baskin. Mr. Ditkovich calls him out for being late on rent again, and Peter says that he promises that he has a paycheck coming. The landlord responds by saying that if promises were crackers, his daughter would be fat, and it pans over to his daughter Ursula, who I honestly always had such a crush on when I was younger. She is this very petite blonde woman who is probably in her early 20s and clearly has a bit of a crush on Peter, despite Peter seemingly not having any interest in her. Peter explains to Mr. Ditkovich as he holds up a 20 that this is all he has to last him the rest of the week, and Mr. Ditkovich snatches the bill out of his hand. And yes, it certainly appears to be raining shit on our friend Peter Parker right now as Ursula attempts to just say hi to him and then subsequently somehow causes a fire to start on the stove behind her. Peter goes inside his modest apartment and sits down on his bed, and the screen subsequently fades to black as Peter is clearly reflecting on what a dog shit life he is leading. The next morning, he wakes up and goes to use the communal bathroom to take a shower, and Mr. Ditkovich cuts in front of him and enters the bathroom. And then it cuts to the laboratory where Harry, taking on the role of young tech CEO douche, is boasting about how Dr. Otto Octavius is going to win the Nobel Prize thanks to funding from Oscorp. Octavius stands up and greets him and modestly assures him that his work is not about awards and money, and he asks Harry who his friend is. Harry introduces Peter to him and shakes his hand, or Peter shakes Octavius's hand and explains to him that he's writing a paper on him. Octavius almost immediately tries to turn Peter away by saying he doesn't have time to talk to students right now, but Harry clearly just deliberately clears his throat, and Octavius changes his tone by saying that Oscorp pays the bills and that he guesses he just has to do whatever the fuck Harry wants him to do, basically. Harry leaves them to get acquainted while declaratively shouting Nobel Prize as he leaves. Octavius has a realization and remembers that Peter is Dr. Connors' student, his friend, and I just love this whole interaction because he's like, yeah, Connors says that you're brilliant, but he also says you're lazy. And just to watch the look on Peter's face as he's like, oh shit, I'm a genius? And then he immediately lets his face drop as he realizes he's actually got more of a reputation as a piece of shit. Octavius lectures Peter about the fact that being intelligent is not enough by itself, and that you must really work hard and use your genius to benefit all of mankind. In a desperate effort to squirm out of this awkward situation, Peter turns and asks Octavius if that's his fusion machine. And Octavius says that it is, and it's meant to create and sustain fusion, but you can tell he kind of wants to get back to telling Peter what a miserable failure he is, and, just how much of a piece of shit he's going to end up being. They begin talking about how the machine works, and Peter pieces together the philosophy behind it remarkably fast, which I'm actually very appreciative of because it's been like 15 minutes since we've seen Spider-Man, so I really like their willingness to pick up the pace here. So naturally, it's made pretty clear that the device generates a tremendous amount of energy, and I'm sure there's no way that could ever ultimately be incredibly dangerous in any way. Of course, it immediately cuts to Peter asking Octavius if he is sure about all of the inner workings of the device to clarify whether or not it could be dangerous. And Octavius dismissively says that it's his life's work and that he understands that even the slightest miscalculation could be catastrophic. Then he uses this interaction as an excuse to bring his wife into the conversation, and he proceeds to modestly compare himself with a number of famous inventors and creative types who are considered geniuses in their fields, before the conversation suddenly shifts to his wife asking Peter more about himself and asking if he has a girlfriend, and Peter just hesitates a bunch before saying, I don't know. And let me just clarify for you, Peter. As a guy who knows exactly what not having a girlfriend looks like, you absolutely do not have a fucking girlfriend. Octavius asks him how he could not know, which is probably the fairest question to ever ask anyone, given Peter's response, and his wife stops Otto and says not to badger him because maybe it's a secret love, and Octavius points out that love should never be kept a secret. Of course, I'm sitting here thinking there are probably many times where it's appropriate to keep love a secret. Like, for instance, if, the person you love is already in a happy relationship, or maybe one time you asked someone out and a friend told you the worst they could say was no, and then when you asked them out, they actually just said ew, which is so much worse than a no that it's hard to even put it into words. So now you only love from a distance, or maybe just it's important to realize that perhaps if you're a superhero and you're doing so to protect the person you love, that it might be reasonable to keep love a secret. But honestly, if Peter didn't want to be badgered about whether or not he had a girlfriend, maybe he shouldn't have given such a bullshit non-committal answer that would open him up to such badgering. Octavius and his wife discuss how they met, and it is legitimately the silliest thing. She explains that he was studying science and she was studying English literature, and he says he was trying to explain to her the theory of relativity, and she was trying to explain to him the works of T.S. Eliot. And it's like, hey, did these writers just pick the most obvious topics in each of those subjects and try and make it seem this generic? But the gist of Octavius's point is, according to him, the quickest way to a woman's heart is with poetry. I also do want to point out that Rosie Octavius, played by actress Donna Murphy, is aggressively attractive. And it's really nice how I can go back and visit these movies that I saw when I was young and find new attractive people that I didn't find attractive before. But we cut to the laundromat, and Peter has his clothes in the washer and he's checked out a bunch of poetry books, I guess with the hopes of wooing Mary Jane with someone else's words. And also, it's like, hey, plot, let's decide what the fuck's going on here. Either Peter is in love with Mary Jane, but he can't be with her because of his life as Spider Man and all the danger that comes with it, or he loves her, but he just doesn't know how to tell her or is just too intimidated. If it's the latter, then it should be represented that way all the time and consistently. And obviously, I don't really know. I can only go based on intuition, but it seems like reading or writing the woman you love poems, if she's just a crush and you're not together already, would probably not go over super well unless she happened to already be into you. So I'm just saying that you should really tread lightly with this idea. Peter opens up the washing machine and pulls out his Spider-Man costume, and he immediately stuffs it into a bag so he can conceal it, only to realize that he ruined all of his lighter colored clothes with the blue and red of his suit. And I still really don't know how people do this, because almost as soon as I started doing my own laundry, I have combined colors and whites in the same load and have never had this happen. And I've used a variety of temperatures and still not been able to cause my clothes to bleed colors into one another at all, especially not in the comedic way it usually happens in the movies and in TV shows and stuff, even though I know it does really happen. And everyone I've ever told this to, that is a clothing segregation purist, insists that combining them together is wrong, despite the fact that they can't really explain to me what the problem is with doing it if I don't have those issues. And also, I do want to point out that they are going to be on the wrong side of history when all is said and done, because I think the different shades of clothing could really learn a lot from each other inside those little machines. Oh, okay. Excuse me. Peter goes home and gets dressed in his fancy pants suit, presumably getting ready to go to Mary Jane's play. He has this moment where he looks at the Spider-Man suit in his closet and the dress suit next to it before he ultimately picks the dress suit and grabs his ticket to the play, and he just heads out. It cuts backstage, and one of Mary Jane's co-stars points out that she seems a bit jittery tonight, and MJ merely says that you never know who might come. Peter stops by this stand and buys her flowers on the way, and as he hands the vendor the money, the vendor stops him and takes away like 90% of his flowers, leaving him with like 3 flowers. And man, it almost seems like Peter maybe should have figured out how much they cost before he just, attempted to buy it. As Peter makes his way down the street on his scooter, a car chase comes up behind him and he has to jump off his scooter and do a big backflip to avoid being run over. Of course, Peter is now forced to act and chase after these bad guys who are very much getting away from the police, and he manages to use his webs to catch a police cruiser that is catapulted into the air and ends up saving a group of people who would have surely perished if the car landed on them. One of the people he saved sees the webs on the car and yells out, "Go, Spidey, go," as he flies away. And I do have to say that the effects in this movie are spectacularly well done, and I honestly will have to wait and see for sure, but it seems like there aren't any moments that are iffy from that standpoint in this movie, whereas in the first movie there are a few moments that were questionable and cartoonish looking with the CGI. As the bad guys begin to fire their guns at Spider-Man, he jumps on their car and pulls their guns out of their hands with his webs and subsequently leaves them dangling from a light post. It cuts to Mary Jane's play already in progress as she's doing a scene, and she looks out into the audience and sees a painfully obvious empty seat near the front that would belong to Peter, presumably. And it just seems like there was no way that Mary Jane got Peter a ticket to the show, because it sounded like he surprised her by saying he was going to come at all. So this is a very movie-ish moment where she looks at this empty seat, because I refuse to believe Peter would have had the budget or at least the forethought to have gotten a seat near the front like this. Obviously, I don't know what their cost structure is for the tickets, but I assume Peter would have had a hard time landing tickets that good either way, even if price was a flat rate. Peter finally pulls up in front of the venue in the bad guy's convertible and parks, and a cop immediately tells Peter that if he parks there, he will get towed. But of course, Peter just says whatever and walks inside, where the usher gives him a hard time about first his shoelace, then his tie. This usher is played by Bruce Campbell, who is the guy that starred in the Evil Dead movies that were also directed by Sam Raimi. Then, as Peter attempts to enter the theater, the usher stops him again and informs him that after the doors are closed, he can't let him in because it's important to maintain the illusion for the audience. Peter explains that Mary Jane invited him to come see the show, and the usher points out that she probably didn't ask him to come late. Peter tries to plead with him to allow him to just go inside and he can stand in the back and not distract anybody, but the guy is not budging and I guess is supposed to look like a dick, even though he's being totally reasonable and fair. And also, like, hey, Peter, did you consider maybe leaving just a tad earlier for this for this event on the off chance that anything happened on the way there? Of course you did. So Peter leaves to go outside and I guess wait for Mary Jane to emerge from the front of the building, even though it seems like she would probably come and go from the back where the dressing room is. Then, as she comes out and Peter notices her, he gets up to walk in her direction, and then the man who is presumably her new romantic partner arrives to surprise her. This guy is sporting a Matt Damon Good Will Hunting haircut, and the two of them walk away, and Peter rushes off and throws on his costume again. He begins swinging away through the city as another police chase is in progress, but suddenly, when he goes to swing once more, no web comes out, and he panics and plummets to the ground. But of course, he doesn't die for whatever reason, and he goes to try and shoot his web again, but it just makes the start of the weird sound it normally does when shooting a web without any web coming out. He has to take an elevator that he ends up sharing with some random guy who thinks he's just cosplaying, I suppose, and it gets really awkward. Then he changes out of the costume somewhere and is seen carrying his helmet and dragging his heavily damaged scooter home on the sidewalk. It cuts to the next day where he's calling Mary Jane on a payphone and he leaves a message trying to explain his side of the story with him not showing up to her play. She shows up shortly after the answering machine picks up and she basically just gets to hear him give a whole bunch of excuses, and it just drives me nuts because honestly, it's like he's doing the absolute worst thing he could do, but if he did what he actually should do, there's like no good conflict anymore. The money for his payphone call runs out, and the voice tells him through the payphone that he needs to deposit more money to keep the call going, but he doesn't have any more, so it just cuts off the call. Now, I don't really remember what the pricing was for the average call on a payphone, and I don't know how likely it is that this would have been a local call, but I would have preferred that this answering machine would have cut him off instead of having this whole bit where the payphone is asking for more money. Like, it would make more sense if the answering machine cut him off because he was going on, and then when he tried to call back, he didn't have any money left. Because I just don't buy that he's running out of time on that payphone call that quickly when he's just leaving a message. Like, even if it only gave you a minute, I don't think it made that far. But he stays on the line after the call cuts out, and he uses this time, as he is talking to no one, to confess to Mary Jane that he is in fact Spider-Man, because that's what he really wants to tell her, even though it seems like he never had any intention to tell her in any of the numerous times that he's had a chance to do so. He explains that him being Spider-Man is the reason he can't be with her, because if his enemies found out about her, they would use her against him and put her in danger. Then it cuts back to Dr. Octavius's demonstration of his fusion machine. He pulls back a sheet that's concealing something and reveals something that's not the actual fusion machine, but it's actually 4 mechanical arms that will attach to his back that he will use to operate the fusion device. Octavius explains that these mechanical arms are impervious to heat and magnetism, so they're perfect for helping him initiate and stabilize the fusion. He stands with his back to the device, and the device inserts several needles into his spine as a way of attaching the device to his back and also allowing him to control the arms with his mind. Suddenly, the arms essentially come to life and leave the holsters that they were in, and the ends of the arms open up to reveal that they're actually three-pronged claws. A woman in the audience, who I assume is a member of the press, asks Octavius how, if the arms are as advanced in artificial intelligence as he suggests, that they wouldn't ultimately take over despite him controlling them. And he explains that she's correct, and that's why he developed an inhibitor chip that allows him to maintain his higher brain functions and prevent that from happening. And he conveniently placed this chip at the top of the base of the arms behind his neck, where it could never be jeopardized in any way, I assume. So Octavius decides it's time to begin his demonstration of the fusion machine, using the arms to reach things that his human hands would not be able to safely touch or reach. He turns on the device, and the reaction begins, but as the energy builds within the reaction, it quickly spikes and seems to create an electromagnet reaction as all of the metallic objects in the room are drawn to the machine. He tries to explain that it's merely a temporary spike and that he can retain control, but Rosie quickly realizes that everyone in the room is in danger, and she tells everyone to leave the room immediately. Octavius insists that he is still in control and that he can stabilize it with his arms, even when Harry tells him to shut the machine off. And suddenly, as Harry is standing there, a cabinet behind him begins magnetically pulling toward him, and Spider-Man appears and swings Harry out of the way and into safety. Harry promptly asserts to Spider-Man that this doesn't change anything, suggesting that he still hates Spider-Man, and Spider-Man just stares at him blankly in disbelief. And as Spider-Man comes to Octavius's view, Octavius asks him what he's doing, and he says he's going to pull the plug, but Octavius rapidly knocks him into a wall. The electromagnet causes the frame of the windows in the room to begin buckling, and as the glass shatters, a large shard of it flies over and stabs Rosie in the neck, killing her instantly. Octavius witnesses this event and cries out in agony, and suddenly the fields of energy make contact with his arms and then fry the inhibitor chip at the base of his neck. And I have to ask, was this like his first ever test of this device? Why would he have done this in front of an audience and also in such an impractical and unprotected environment? It just seems like he should have had a lot more of a controlled atmosphere in which to carry out this demonstration. Of course, this whole thing is a disaster, and some men that are leaving the building afterwards suggest that if there had been a tad more tritium used, Octavius could have destroyed the whole city. And Harry walks out after them and proclaims that he's ruined because he had provided all of the funding and was banking on a successful demonstration. And Harry is seemingly equally angry that Spider-Man had the audacity to appear there, and he even resents the fact that Spider-Man would dare touch him to save his life. Peter walks outside and appears distraught after all of the events of the demonstration. It cuts to the hospital where they're in the OR and about to attempt to remove the mechanical arms from Octavius's back. They explain that the metal needles went into Octavius's spine when he was putting on the device, and they ended up fusing with his spinal cord. Like, they welded themselves through this fusion to his spinal cord. As the doctor starts up his saw to cut the arms off, he notices one of the arms moves in the pulley that it's hanging from, but he resumes, and then he sees in the reflection of someone's glasses that this arm is coming for him, and it just promptly knocks him out. And legitimately within seconds, all hell breaks loose as all four arms begin attacking everyone in the room and destroying the entire operating room. It's pure chaos as the arms are picking up these doctors and throwing them all over the place and smashing them against things, and none of them can really do anything to save themselves. Oh, and in case I wasn't good enough about explaining this earlier, the fact that the inhibitor chip was destroyed during the demonstration has allowed the claws to basically take over Octavius's mind or something, is the implication. And even though the AI of the arms shouldn't have just been purely mean-spirited, they totally are. It's like the preconceived notion is that, oh, this AI, well, automatically if he loses control, these AI mechanical arms are immediately going to want to do evil things. So basically, now Dr. Octavius is 100% supervillain level evil, and he does a Darth Vader style no before he breaks out of the hospital. It cuts back to the Daily Bugle, where Jameson is talking about the events of the demonstration and dubs Octavius Dr. Octopus now that he technically has 8 limbs, and even remarks about how crazy the odds are that his name is Octavius and that this happened to him, which is a pretty good meta joke, actually. Then Peter shows up and Jameson chastises him for not having pictures of what happened at the fusion demonstration, but just as he goes to fire him, he unfires him because he needs him to attend this high society event where Jameson's son will be, and he wants him to take pictures there. Peter asks if Jameson could pay him in advance for the work, and we get one of the most used gifs where Jameson laughs hysterically at the suggestion, and he asks Peter if he's actually being serious, because obviously Jameson is not the kind of guy that would pay someone in advance for their work. Octavius goes into an abandoned warehouse in the harbor that's just in severe disrepair, and he laments at the loss of his wife as well as his dream of making the fusion experiment work. Octavius also suggests that his 4 mechanical limbs should be at the bottom of the river along with himself, but he just then finally realizes that the inhibitor chip was destroyed and he is no longer in control of his mechanical limbs. After a lot of debating with himself as well as with the arms, I guess, he determines that he wants to attempt to rebuild the entire device, this time accounting for more of the contingencies that went wrong, and he wants to do it in this shitty rundown warehouse. But he realizes he'll need money, and despite very mild initial reluctance to become a criminal and steal the money, the arms, I guess, convince him that this is what he must do. We see Aunt May and Peter pleading with a man at the bank to refinance Aunt May's house, but between a very modest income source of Social Security and payouts from Uncle Ben's life insurance, they won't approve her to refinance. Suddenly it shows Octavius, who will now also be known as Doc Ock or Dr. Octopus. Actually, I want to be clear, I'm never going to call him Dr. Octopus because it's just so much longer and Doc Ock just sounds cooler. He uses his mechanical arms to rip the door off a bank vault out of a wall. And you might be thinking, my gosh, Brandon, this couldn't possibly be the exact same bank that we just saw Peter and Aunt May at, could it? And to that I must say, of course it's the exact same bank. And he even throws the vault door and almost hits the two of them while they are still seated at the desk where they just got denied refinancing. Peter rushes off to change into his costume, but Aunt May and the banker, of course, just assume that he's some cravenly coward fucking pussy who is just running away and leaving them there to fend for themselves. A few guards pull guns on Doc Ock and tell him to put up all of his arms, but he quickly knocks them all out and begins grabbing the bags of money from the bank vault. But then he hears Spider-Man coming and promptly begins throwing these heavy bags of coins at Spider-Man as he crawls around, and it seems like a pretty evenly matched back and forth they have going. Before you remember, of course, that Spider-Man is having trouble with his powers, and when he goes to shoot a web, it doesn't actually work. Doc Ock manages to get a hold of him and even begins using 2 of his claws to attempt to crush Spider-Man's skull, but with a dash of Deus Ex Machina, Spider-Man is able to shoot his webs again for some reason and grab 2 desks and fling them in the direction of Doc Ock. And if you don't know what Deus Ex Machina means, it's basically in the same family as a plot hole, but it's really more of a plot convenience. Like, it's not logically inaccurate to have happen based on established premises, but it's also incredibly convenient. It's like they established that Spider-Man's powers are not working consistently, and then they just happen to be able to work as he is faced with certain death at the hands of Doc Ock so he can survive. But honestly, if someone called this a plot hole, I probably couldn't argue with them, even though I probably would enjoy arguing with them just for funsies. Doc Ock goes to flee the bank, and the police show up and draw their guns, but he grabs Aunt May as a hostage and tells them not to follow him. He continues carrying her as he claws up a building until Spider-Man catches up and he stops in front of him, and Doc Ock teases at the idea of letting Spider-Man take Aunt May, but he almost immediately proceeds to just drop her and she goes plummeting down toward the street, forcing Spider-Man to shoot his web to catch her before she hits the ground and perishes. And don't ask me why, but saying the word perishes instead of dies or gets killed sounds so amusing to me because I rarely ever hear anyone use the term perish, and it just delights me, and it just sounds so much more dramatic. Before Spider-Man can pull Aunt May all the way up, Doc Ock grabs him and begins smashing him into the walls of the building, which results in large pieces of debris falling down on the street below. And hey, even Stan Lee makes a cameo appearance to pull someone out of the way to prevent them from being hit by the large pieces of debris and perishing. And suddenly, Aunt May just happens to be carrying her umbrella on this sunny, clear day so that she can use it to support herself and prevent her from falling. There is a huge struggle between Doc and Spider-Man as they're falling down this building, and I guess maybe the CGI isn't perfect here, but by 2004 standards, this is fucking stellar, and I honestly don't think it's even bad by today's standards. And also, it never helps when you know a scene had to be done with CGI. It makes it very hard to suspend disbelief when you're watching it. Doc Ock flings Spider-Man into a building across the street and then grabs Aunt May again and tells Spider-Man that he has stuck his webs in his business for the last time, and now he'll have this random woman's death, who he definitely doesn't know, to weigh on his conscience. Then Spider-Man shoots his web from both hands to either side of the window frame where he was thrown into the building and uses it to slingshot himself across the street at Doc Ock. But as Spider-Man is flying across the street in the air, Aunt May realizes that Doc Ock was banking on this action and is about to just straight up kill Spider-Man in a single blow, but she hits him across the face with her umbrella and prevents him from delivering that lethal blow. But again, it's like, what's going on with Spider-Man's powers? Because it seems like they've been working more than they have been not working, and it's just seemingly deliberately not well defined to provide random adversity for Spider-Man in certain moments. As Doc Ock recoils from being hit across the face and Spider-Man lands on the building, he drops Aunt May and Spider-Man dives down after her. Then he catches her and swings away on his web with her in his arms. The police open fire from the ground at Octavius as he inexplicably has what I guess are a couple of bags of money that I must have missed him carrying around and stashing somewhere while all of this was going on, because he surely wasn't holding them the whole time. And it cuts to Spider-Man landing with Aunt May, and she proclaims that she sure has been wrong about him, because early in the movie, she kind of implied that she thought he was bad news, basically. And then as he tries to buddy up with her, he proclaims, "We sure showed him," and Aunt May immediately fires back with, "What do you mean, we?" And I'm like, Aunt May, were you suggesting that you single-handedly just took down Doc Ock just then? Girl, get serious, please. Is the implication of what you're saying that Spider-Man did absolutely nothing to help and that you and your umbrella were the only ones to thank? But as she says it, he just freezes and doesn't really know what to say back to her, and he just swings away. And I apologize, I've only seen this movie a few times, and obviously I watch a lot of movies, but I'm really hoping they eventually do a better job of explaining what's going on with Spider-Man's powers than they have so far. It cuts to later that night where Peter is at the high society event where he's supposed to be taking photographs for Jameson, and they're just really hammering home what a run of bad luck Peter is having as he reaches for an hors d'oeuvre and someone snatches the last one before he can get to it. Then he goes to take a couple's picture and he forgets to take the lens cap off his camera, and by the time he realizes that the lens cap was on, they've like already walked away. But conveniently, Harry not Harriet. Harry is at the event too, attempting to drown his sorrows over his failed investment in Octavius's fusion machine. Peter comes by and tells him to take it easy, but Harry doesn't want to hear it and complains about the failed demonstration. Harry brings up Spider-Man, who he refers to as the Bug, and tells Peter that his crusade against the vigilante will not end until he gets his revenge on him. Suddenly, Jameson shows up and pulls Peter away to get him to take pictures of Jameson with his wife, and basically wants pictures of them with various popular figures like the mayor and stuff. The whole reason Jameson wanted Peter there taking pictures in the first place is because the entire event is seemingly centered around his son, John, who is an astronaut. And wouldn't you know it, as they introduce John, he comes walking down the stairs, and the smoke show redhead that he is walking with is none other than Mary Jane Watson, because he's the dude that she's been romantically involved with lately that we saw briefly outside of the theater with the Good Will Hunting haircut. And honestly, this is a major upgrade in every way for her, and I couldn't be happier for her. Plus, I think Peter would be way happier with Ursula. I know I sure as heck would be. Peter and MJ make eye contact with each other, and then later on, he approaches her when she is by herself. When she turns and sees it's him, she's immediately irritated, because honestly, anyone would be if they were in her shoes, and she tells him that she doesn't know him anymore. He tries to apologize to her, and he even attempts to recite a poem to her, and gosh, would you believe it wasn't received super well by her? She basically lays into him because just thinking about him is so unpleasant for her now. She points out that her new boyfriend, John, has seen her play 5 times. Harry has seen it twice. Aunt May has seen it, and even her sick mother got out of bed to see it. But she explains that she can't count on her best friend to come to even one show and support her, and I'm kind of like, what is the bar for them being best friends? It doesn't seem fathomable based on what we've seen between the two of them in these 2 movies, that could possibly be the nature of their friendship. But I mean, she was at his house for a surprise birthday party, so I guess we're accepting that as an established fact when she says it. Peter can't really refute what a piece of shit he's been, and Mary Jane basically just shuts him down and walks away as he just stands there with his mouth agape. Then as Peter walks away, Harry confronts him again and points out that he refused to turn Spider-Man in because Peter makes all of his money off of him. He says that Peter stole Mary Jane from him. He stole his father's love, which is pretty debatable, but I guess Harry seems pretty drunk and he's obviously just not in a good place. But he goes ahead and slaps Peter multiple times across the face in front of everybody before storming off. And just as he does, John Jameson comes over on a microphone and announces that Mary Jane has just agreed to marry him. And it's like, good for you, girl. You pulled an astronaut. The odds of that happening are steep enough to make even the most reckless gambler cringe. Peter stands there dumbfounded as he hears the news, and Jameson gives him a hard time for not immediately taking a picture. Then it cuts to Spider-Man rage swinging across the city until he goes to shoot his web and nothing comes out again, and he plummets down and falls in a puddle in an alley, and he's of course largely unharmed by this. He stands up and looks at his hands and attempts to shoot his webbing again, but it doesn't work, and he asks out loud why this is happening to him. Then he attempts to crawl up the wall before falling off almost immediately and falls back onto the ground. He sits up against a nearby dumpster and grabs a discarded newspaper, but as he attempts to read it, the print comes in and out of focus. And this was one of the big things in the first movie when he gets his powers, is that he was originally wearing these really strong prescription glasses, and then once he gets the powers, he doesn't need them anymore. But the morning after he got bit by the spider, he just suddenly could see very clearly, is essentially it. So he returns home to sit on his bed in frustration, and it cuts to Doc Ock trying to assemble his new fusion machine in the warehouse, which is much easier with the help of all of these mechanical arms. Peter goes to see the doctor, and the doctor says that he seems okay to him and that it must be in his head or something. And what has to be the silliest idea he could possibly follow through with, Peter explains to this doctor that in his dreams he is Spider-Man and is losing his powers, even though he clarifies he's totally not Spider-Man at all. And then he immediately attempts to backpedal and go so far as to say that this is happening actually in a friend's dream, really not even his, which is completely insane for reasons I don't really think I need to get into. And according to the comment section on YouTube for the video of this scene, there is an extended version of this in the doctor's office where it's heavily implied that the doctor does in fact realize Peter is Spider-Man, but deliberately doesn't point out that he knows as much so as to not panic Peter. But as the scene was left in the theatrical cut of the movie, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense the way they do it, because it does not seem, based on what they show, that this doctor actually figures out what's going on. Peter proceeds to hallucinate a conversation with his late Uncle Ben, and Peter pleads with him that he can't continue living like this. He declares that he is just Peter Parker and he is Spider-Man no more. And it's like, hey, that's the name of the comic this movie was based on. He very ceremoniously discards his spider suit in a trash can in an alley, which is actually taken directly from the comic as well. Like, it's the exact same shot and everything. And it provides a cool visual as you can see the mask and arm hanging out of the trash can, and it just seems like he discarded it here just so it couldn't as easily be traced back to him. Next thing we know, BJ Thomas's Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head starts playing, and it shows how much better Peter is doing as he walks through the park. He seems much more carefree and throws his glasses back on and repairs a bike inside his apartment and accidentally sends its wheel rolling off his balcony and down onto the street below. He witnesses a crime in progress and doesn't involve himself with it, and he's even attending class and seemingly engaging in the discussion and not like half asleep. And Dr. Connors commends his efforts as they leave class one day. He goes to Mary Jane's play, and Mary Jane is actually so distracted by his presence there that she completely loses track of what she's doing, what with acting terribly in this play. Sometime after the play, MJ and Peter are walking together, and he is explaining to her about how he has really turned his life around, and she basically has to set him straight by telling him that she's getting married now, and the fact that he attended one of her performances doesn't really change that or change their relationship. He pleads with her by telling her that she once told him she loved him, but he let his life get in the way, and he was doing things that he knows now he didn't need to be doing. But obviously her frustration with him is too much, and it's really a lot to ask for her to just forgive him, and she decides to just take off in a cab. Back at the Daily Bugle, Jameson is putting together his front page, and his editor, Robbie Robertson, is there with him when a man shows up holding a paper bag, claiming he has something that Jameson will want to see. Out of it, he pulls Spider-Man's costume that he had discarded in that can in the alley. Of course, because Jameson hates Spider-Man, he is over the moon about the likely possibility that Spider-Man has given up his crusade. Robbie Robertson, who would have the most comic book sounding name in this movie were it not for J. Jonah Jameson, Dr. Otto Octavius, and Peter Parker, clutches the Spider-Man mask and looks distraught because Robbie is notoriously the guy closest to Jameson at the Bugle that frequently defends Spider-Man in his actions and tries to keep Jonah in check with his outlandish views of Spider-Man. It's even heavily implied that he either suspects Peter is Spider-Man or that he actually knows but won't blow Peter's cover. The news of Spider-Man's retirement hits the front page of the Bugle, and it cuts to Peter walking down the street, being carefree again. But when he looks over and sees a man being jumped in an alley, he realizes that he's having a twinge of regret about not intervening in situations like this anymore. Of course, he could just intervene as a person because, that's an option. She explains Aunt May and Peter go to visit Uncle Ben's grave and then return to her house, where he reminds her that she doesn't have to punish herself for what happened to her husband. She explains that she still feels bad because that night that Ben died, Peter wanted to just take the subway, but Ben insisted on driving Peter himself, and she proclaimed that if she had insisted that Ben just let Peter take the subway, he might still be alive, even though Ben was seizing a chance to talk to his nephew, and she had no reason to think this was a bad idea, which is a classic case of what we call survivor's guilt, and it's really just a fallacy in this perception that if you could go back and change things and maybe have made different decisions, you could have prevented someone's death. But in reality, the shit that's gonna happen is gonna happen, basically. And I mean, usually we hear survivor's guilt more in a capacity where it's like someone dies and they don't even think it's their fault, but they feel bad that they were the only one that got to live, because it's like they feel like they don't deserve it, or they get to see how sad everybody else is about the deaths that actually happened, even though they lived. And in reality, the only person who is to blame for all of this is the guy who killed Uncle Ben. Peter finally breaks down and confesses what really happened that night. He explains to her that he wasn't just in the library doing homework, even though that was what Ben thought he was doing, or at least that was what he was driving Peter downtown to do. He says that he never went into the library and proceeded into the wrestling event so he could earn money in order to buy a car to impress Mary Jane. Then, of course, he reveals that when the guy wouldn't pay him more than $100 after the event instead of the agreed upon $3,000 because he didn't last 3 minutes in the fight, Peter was angry, and the guy almost immediately got robbed, and Peter was standing between the robber and the doorway where he was escaping to, and could have easily stopped the guy, but he wanted revenge on the guy who didn't pay him, and that robber proceeded to murder Uncle Ben after Ben refused to give up his car to the robber. He explains that Uncle Ben died that night for being the only person who did the right thing, but as I mentioned, that is a patently absurd statement to make, because the right thing to do was to give up that fucking car and not let some guy shoot you over it because it's a fucking car. And I'm willing to guess, based on the age of that car, it probably got like 8 miles to the gallon, and it probably would have ultimately been a better deal for him to fucking get a new vehicle, even though that one had been paid off for like 15 years, I'm sure. And I'm willing to guess oh, I'm sorry, I already said that. Aunt May becomes furious with Peter as he makes his tearful confession, and she storms out of the room in silence. It cuts back to Doc Ock assembling the new fusion machine in the warehouse. I guess you could probably call this a reactor, but I honestly don't know anywhere near enough about this stuff to say for sure, and Wikipedia's plot section calls it a machine only, so I'm going to stick with that because Wikipedia is the world's most trusted information source. Doc Ock declares that there is just one more little chore to be done, but he doesn't tell himself what that is because we get to be left in suspense about it. And it shows Harry angrily looking at clippings about Spider-Man, determined to figure out how he can find him. Suddenly, the Osborn butler, Bernard, comes and tells Harry that he's leaving for the night, and I don't know who the guy that plays him is friends with, but this guy is a legitimately awful actor. He pointed out to Harry that his father Norman only ever obsessed about his work before Harry callously dismisses him and ignores the sentiment. Basically, he's pointing out like his dad was just worried about the work stuff. He didn't like obsess over a person he wanted to kill or whatever, even though that's also not really true. After Bernard goes, Harry can hear his penthouse shaking, and suddenly Doc Ock appears, demanding that Harry provide him with tritium to complete the new fusion machine. Although Harry initially declines, Octavius uses one of his mechanical arms to dangle Harry above the street, which is several floors below, and Harry finally relents and proclaims that he will give him the tritium if Doc Ock will kill Spider-Man for him. And there are a couple of points of contention I have about this, and I do want to stress that I actually do really enjoy this movie overall, but I can just be a bit of a stickler as I'm watching things, so don't take any of this too much to heart. But Harry is in no position to negotiate with Doc Ock in this situation, because Doc could legitimately just respond with, like, when Harry gives this proposition, he could just respond by saying, or how about I just fucking kill you? Because Octavius could have straight up just gone to Oscorp and stolen the tritium himself, but he didn't do that, so this part of the plot could come into play. But Harry reconsiders his proposition and suggests that he would rather have Spider-Man brought to him alive for some reason. But of course, Doc agrees with his terms because he already kind of hated Spider-Man anyway, so this is honestly a win-win-win situation. Harry wins because Octavius will find Spider-Man for him. Octavius will win because he gets his tritium and he gets to remove Spider-Man from being disruptive, and the audience wins by watching the plot progress in an interesting way. Octavius asks Harry where he might be able to find Spider-Man, and Harry tells him that Peter Parker is the key because he takes pictures of Spider-Man all the time. Harry very lackadaisically calls out to Ock as Ock is heading off that he shouldn't harm Peter when he finds him. And I'm sure we can just bank on Octavius having heard that, even though he doesn't really say it loud enough and Octavius doesn't actually acknowledge it. It cuts to Peter, who encounters a building on fire, and he runs inside and faces great danger as he tries to find a screaming child trapped inside. When he finally finds her, it's quite the struggle for him to get her out safely, but he eventually does, and he brings her to her panicked parents on the sidewalk, who are frankly way too fucking close to this burning building. The firemen come by later to commend Peter for the guts he has, but they mention for no reason whatsoever that someone ended up dying on a different floor. Peter finally begins to determine that his personal needs do not outweigh his responsibilities as Spider-Man while he's looking out the window of his tiny apartment that has a legitimately good view somehow. Suddenly, his concentration is broken as Ursula opens the door to his apartment unannounced and realizes she should have knocked before entering. And it's like, yeah, Ursula, you probably shouldn't have entered at all before someone actually answered the door. But I can't stay mad at you because honestly, I would have been 17 when I saw this movie the first time, and I was just over the moon about Ursula. She closes the door back and lightly knocks, and Peter tells her to come in. She opens the door again and very sheepishly asks Peter if he would like a slice of chocolate cake and a glass of milk, and I'm like, shit, bro, must be fucking nice. So the two of them both sit down and have their own slices of chocolate cake and glasses of milk, and honestly, Peter should just wife this chick up so fast. He already fucked it all up with Mary Jane anyway, and even if somehow he convinced Mary Jane to get back or to get with him, she would still resent him deeply for all he has done thus far, including making her leave her dream life with a fucking astronaut husband. And if she didn't throw it in his face in every argument, she would just let the resentment build until she ultimately faked her own death and went into hiding and started a new life. Ursula gives Peter a message from his Aunt May, and he goes to see Aunt May as she's packing up things at her house because she found a new place that's more affordable. Aunt May is in a very forgiving mood and tells Peter that it's water under the bridge regarding their last interaction, and she tells him that it was very brave of him to confess such a thing to her because she's sure it was difficult for him, and he knew that she wouldn't like to hear about it. The neighbor boy Henry, who is helping Aunt May pack things up and get them loaded into a truck that she is also aggressively underpaying for his underage work, by the way, stops Peter and asks him if he really takes pictures of Spider-Man for the newspaper, and Peter says that he used to. Henry asks where Spider-Man is now, and Aunt May points out that the two of them agree that they don't see Spider-Man in the paper anymore, and it's like, yeah, they ran a story about how he quit. Peter explains that Spider-Man quit and he wanted to try other things, but Henry asks if Spider-Man will be back, and Peter just says he doesn't know. May explains to Peter that Henry knows a hero when he sees one, and kids need heroes to set an example for them that will show them they need to do the right thing. For someone who very much does not seem to know that Peter is Spider-Man, she lays this whole speech on him pretty fucking thick, as if she did know Peter was Spider-Man. And of course, it's more than enough to convince him that he probably needs to return to his life as Spider-Man and keep doing good. Peter finds a random city rooftop where legitimately anyone could see him and make out a lot of identifying characteristics about him, and he declares that he needs to strongly focus. And I want to point out something. I like Danny Elfman's theme song / score for this movie, but I do think it doesn't fit the tone of the actual movie. It's like it's way too dark seeming, and that's kind of Danny Elfman's style. And the movie itself is just not particularly bright or particularly dark. It's one of the brighter superhero movies I've ever seen. So Peter tries to get himself to focus, and he charges toward the edge of this building and proceeds to jump off it and declares that he is back as he leaps in the air, but he gets about halfway to the next building before he realizes he doesn't actually have the momentum to make it, and he falls and has to catch himself on a clothesline. Then he immediately plummets down and hits a couple of parked cars and cries out about his back, but also basically he just walks away completely unharmed otherwise. And honestly, I'm not exaggerating. This fall would have killed him without question, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to believe about Spider-Man's powers. He's not invulnerable, but it does seem like he can really take a beating. It cuts to Mary Jane and her fiance at one of their apartments, and John is asking her why she isn't inviting her photographer friend. And MJ just declares that she doesn't want to invite Peter because he's a jerk, and John proclaims that a lot of people are jerks. And then she decides she wants to recreate her and Spider-Man's infamous upside down kiss from the first movie by kissing John while he lays on the couch and has no idea what the fuck she's doing. And of course, there's just not the spark that she had with Spider-Man when she does it with John. And I'm like, girl, please do not leave this guy because of that. You will never emotionally recover from this if you do. Seriously, there is nothing wrong with this guy, and he seems like a very nice man, but she opts to meet with Peter at a cafe, and he doesn't really know why the fuck she wants to meet with him. She tries to tell him that she didn't want to believe him when they talked after her play about how much he had changed, but he basically stops her mid-thought and tells her that he actually had more to say, and he may have been wrong when he was all optimistic, because obviously things have changed that he can't really explain, and he of course can't elaborate on that without revealing that he's Spider-Man. So with frustration in her eyes, Mary Jane asks him if he loves her or not, and he says he doesn't, even though he totally does, but he's just trying to protect her. She tells him to kiss her because she needs to know something and just wants one kiss from him, because I guess she'll know if he kisses the same way Spider-Man did 2 years ago. But just as he goes to lean in and kiss her, Peter's spider sense goes off and a car is being thrown at the window of the cafe that they're in, and he has to dive on her to prevent her from being killed. The two of them stand up and can hear a thudding noise, but they can't tell where it's coming from, and suddenly Doc Ock comes into view, and they do this really weird thing with the camera where each thud, it does this really jarring zoom, one zoom at a time, getting a little bit closer to them, and it's so weird. I don't know what they were trying for. But as Doc comes into view, he tells Peter to find his friend Spider-Man and have him meet him at the pier, but Peter claims he doesn't know where to find him, but Octavius tells him that if Spider-Man doesn't come there at the time he wants him to, he will peel the flesh from Mary Jane's bones, and he takes her with him after throwing Peter into a wall. After a ton of debris collapses onto Peter, he emerges from the rubble and realizes his powers have returned. It cuts to Jameson lamenting about the fact that if he hadn't driven Spider-Man away and forced him to quit, he probably was the only one who could have stopped his son's fiance from being kidnapped. Just as Jameson is admitting that Spider-Man is actually a hero, you hear a web shooter, and Jameson looks up at the spider suit mounted on the wall, and it has vanished with a note that says, "Courtesy, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man," and Jameson reverts back to his animosity toward Spider-Man. Spider-Man manages to find Doc Ock on the top of a building, and when he demands to know where Mary Jane is, the two of them begin fighting up and down the building. Then they manage to fall onto a moving train, and honestly, this entire train sequence makes this whole fucking movie for me. The whole thing is so well executed, and there's so much excitement going on the entire time, and even though the trope of fighting on top of a train is probably a little overdone, they managed to do this so well that I don't really care about that. We get a bit of cat and mouse back and forth between the two of them, and they fight each other as the train keeps moving, and there are a lot of close calls with them getting hit or almost getting hit. Doc moves to the front of the train and knocks out the conductor and forces the lever forward and jams it so the train is going full speed and they can't stop it. Spider-Man assesses the situation and looks forward and realizes that the train is nearing the end of the track and he loses his mask at some point. Then he stands in front of the train and attempts to stop it by jamming his feet into the timbers or whatever they use for the tracks below, but it doesn't really work. And he begins shooting his webbing to either side, but it just breaks. And then he rights himself again and shoots several strands to either side, and it manages to hold long enough to allow him to stop the train just before it falls off the end of the track. Because of all the physical turmoil that this put him through, the passengers of the train pull him inside and lower him down onto the floor. One of them looks down at his maskless face and declares that he is just a kid, just a 36-year-old looking kid who appears to be no older than his own son. And it's like, yeah, he totally looks like he's just a kid. He doesn't look like he's 45. Suddenly, Peter's eyes open and everyone is looking down at him, and he remembers he doesn't have his mask on. The passengers assure him that it's okay and they won't tell anybody, and they hand him his mask and he basically just puts it on. And the kids say that it's good to have him back, and he stands up and Doc breaks back onto the train, and the passengers turn to Doc Ock and declare that if he wants Spider-Man, they'll have to go through them. And Doc just says, very well, and quickly dispatches all of them by moving them out of the way with his massive mechanical arms. And I don't know if this was a deliberate thing, but it almost has to be. There is a moment in the first Spider-Man, which came out the year after 9/11 happened. The movie was actually supposed to come out sooner than it actually did, but they had to re-edit it to remove footage of the Twin Towers and stuff that like featured the Twin Towers pretty prominently. Like he spins a web between the two of them and catches a helicopter in it or something. But there is this really corny moment in the first movie that they clearly added late, where a group of New Yorkers at the climax of the movie start throwing things at Green Goblin as he's grappling with Spider-Man and declare that if Goblin is messing with Spider-Man, he's messing with New York, and that if he's messing with one of them, he's messing with all of them. And it's just really cheesy, and it was annoyingly heavy-handed as like a hurrah moment for solidarity in New York City. And it would be really great if they were intentionally calling back to that moment and diminishing it just a tad, because it was a bit much. But Spider-Man basically just motions to the passengers to clear the way, and Doc promptly knocks him out and brings him back to Harry all tied up. Then Harry, of course, gives Doc Ock the tritium, and Doc leaves as Harry looks over at Spider-Man laying on the bed, or whatever. It's like one of those like therapy chairs, basically, where you lay in it. Harry grabs a decorative dagger from a nearby table that, frankly, every home should have if anyone resides there who hopes to enact vengeance on someone. He pulls off Spider-Man's mask and realizes that it's Peter, of course, but Peter quickly breaks out of his restraints and stands up and tells Harry that Octavius has Mary Jane and wants to know where he might have gone. Harry explains that he was only supposed to take the tritium. He wasn't supposed to do anything else, and Peter quickly realizes that Octavius is probably building another fusion machine. Harry tells Peter that he killed his father, and Peter explains to him that there are bigger things happening right now, and that if Octavius turns on the machine, it could destroy half of New York. It cuts to Octavius putting to use the tritium as Mary Jane is restrained behind him and declares that Spider-Man will come and save him, but Octavius arrogantly tells her that Spider-Man is now dead and no one can stop him, but she tells him she doesn't believe him, and he just insists it's true, and suddenly Spider-Man shows up, and despite needlessly trying to conceal his presence there, Doc Ock realizes that he's there almost immediately. The two of them begin fighting, and Doc Ock makes it clear that he is not concerned about the risks involved with this new machine. Naturally, all hell breaks loose as Doc Ock's machine cannot be contained, and all the metal objects begin pulling to the machine like with the last demonstration. In the struggle, Spider-Man manages to trick Doc Ock into electrocuting and incapacitating himself, but the machine has gone completely out of control at this point. Spider-Man wakes up Doc and reveals who he is and pleads with him to tell him how to shut it off. Octavius makes it clear he's unwilling to stop the machine initially, but Peter manages to convince him that the claws have destroyed his mind and this is not the man he knew based on what must have been like an hour-long conversation they had that one time. Octavius explains that the machine must be drowned in the river to be stopped, and he's the only one who can do it. As MJ watches Octavius's sacrifice, part of the building begins to collapse down, and Peter has to rush to stop it from landing on her and killing her. As Peter awkwardly holds up the structure, he finally confesses to Mary Jane that he does indeed love her, even though he told her he didn't. Then he eventually throws the structure off of him, and Octavius sacrifices himself in order to submerge his new machine. It cuts to Peter and MJ hanging out on a comically large web later that is suspended somewhere, and she claims she thinks she always knew he was Spider-Man, and everyone's like, okay, MJ, I'm sure you did. You just never said it out loud for no reason. And he says she also must realize why they can never be together, and he lowers her down to safety where John greets her. It shows Harry still sitting at home holding his giant novelty dagger, and he hears familiar laughter echoing through his halls. He looks over and sees his father, Norman, in a mirror, played by good old Willem Dafoe, and I swear to God, I don't give a shit if it autocorrects. His name is not William, it's Willem. Willem is how it's spelled, and I will not stand for people misspelling it without correcting it or mispronouncing it. Harry looks in disbelief at his father, who explains to Harry that he is alive inside Harry, and he goes on to say to Harry that he must kill Peter Parker to avenge him. Norman shouts, "Avenge me," and Harry shouts out no for some reason, and then throws the dagger through the mirror, and the mirror shatters and reveals a hidden room behind it where there is a Green Goblin mask, as well as a shit ton of pumpkin bombs, and he eventually finds his father's glider because I guess he had a spare. And I don't honestly know how Harry's arc goes down in the comics, but I really don't care for how they handled his character in this trilogy. Like, you could argue that perhaps that was where Norman Osborn stored his spare Green Goblin parts, but it all feels extremely convenient that it's all just there and would have to have been there the entire time. But that's how it leaves Harry as he looks around at the Green Goblin stuff, and you just know he's going to return in the third movie because he does. It cuts to Mary Jane, who has put on her wedding dress and is looking at herself in the mirror. The ceremony begins and the music plays, and after some delay, a woman comes in to reveal to the groom, John, that Mary Jane will not be coming. We see Mary Jane running through the park in her wedding dress and eventually showing up at Peter's apartment. MJ proclaims that she had to do what she had to do. Peter tells her that she shouldn't be there, but she cuts him off and explains to him that it's her decision and she understands that there will be risks, but she wants to be with Peter. She drops the line, "Isn't it about time that somebody saved your life?" Then after a long pause, she tells him to say something and he says, "Thank you, Mary Jane Watson." And it's like, oh, how clever. And we can hear police sirens in the distance, and he gives her a look and she just says, "Go get him, Tiger," which is a perfect reference to how she refers to him in the comics. And it honestly makes the ending of this movie perfect for me because she's letting him do his thing and she has accepted that this is the life she is choosing. Then it cuts to Spider-Man swinging through the city again, and all I can think is, gosh, how satisfying was that? It'd be a shame if someone perhaps made a god-awful third installment of this franchise with way too many plot threads and characters and awful casting choices. And we roll credits. Alright, so trivia for this movie. The film was shot on over 100 sets and locations. The famous train fight scene was actually filmed in Chicago, not New York City. The train fight between Doc Ock and Spider-Man was the idea of director Sam Raimi and the first major sequence that was filmed. Filming was put on hiatus for 8 weeks so the crew could build the set of Doc Ock's lair and design it to include the collapsing effects. Sam Raimi claims he took inspiration from the 1980 film Superman 2 when he developed plot elements that included Peter's struggle with continuing on as Spider-Man. Doc Ock was selected as the villain for this movie because the director considered him a physical match for Spider-Man. He was a sympathetic figure for humanity, and he had frequently been considered as a potential villain in the first movie during the course of its 15-year development. If you look closely at Peter's apartment, You can see the picture he took of Mary Jane just before he was bitten by the genetically altered spider. It was supposed to represent the last moment of innocence in Peter's life before his life changed forever. At around 5 minutes in, Stan Lee originally filmed the cameo of the man who exclaims, "Whoa, he stole that guy's pizza." But because of problems with the shot, it was refilmed with Donnell Rawlings, and Lee was given a different cameo playing a pedestrian who pulls a woman out of the way of falling debris during a battle between Spider-Man and Doc Ock. At around 1 hour and 9 minutes in, when Jonah Jameson offers the scruffy man $50 for the Spider-Man costume he found, he replies, "I could get more for it on eBay." In 2001, 4 Spider-Man costumes were stolen from the set of the first Spider-Man movie. They were eventually recovered after an 18-month investigation and the arrest of a former movie studio security guard and an accomplice. While Columbia Pictures offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to their return, movie memorabilia experts estimated the value of the costumes as about $50,000 each. And actually, that seems like kind of low to me. But maybe that was, I don't know when they made that assessment, but I would just say based on Marvel's popularity in the years to come, it wouldn't surprise me if they were worth way more. Alfred Molina, who plays Dr. Octopus, actually gave names to his 4 mechanical tentacles, which are Larry, Harry, Flo, and Mo. Flo was the top right tentacle because it was operated by a female grip, and that particular tentacle was the most motherly, which removed his sunglasses and gave him sips of his drink. Willem Dafoe was not originally supposed to return for this movie, but he was walking back to his apartment one night and saw the cast and crew filming nearby. He stopped by the set to say hello, and the filmmakers decided to give him a cameo appearance. At around 1 hour and 3 minutes in, the alley where Peter dumps his Spider-Man suit is supposed to be the same one where he kissed MJ upside down in the first film. For his stunt sequences as Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire's glasses contain no glass. This was less for safety reasons, but more to avoid reflections. The glass was then added back in digitally later. Danny Elfman, who composed the film score for this and several other films by Sam Raimi, had some sort of falling out with the director during the course of this film and has been quoted saying, "To see such a profound negative change in a human being was almost enough to make me feel like I didn't want to make films anymore." However, Raimi and Elfman reunited 9 years later for Oz the Great and Powerful from 2013, which also featured James Franco and was, I assume, a dog shit movie. The movie was sent to cinemas under the name Spray Paint. I'm talking about Spider-Man 2 again, not still the Oz Great and Powerful movie. They sent it under the name Spray Paint to try and avoid the attention of pirates. Kirsten Dunst dyed her hair red for this film, as opposed to wearing a wig like in the first film. The original poster that shows a close-up shot of Spider-Man and Mary Jane had a visual error. On that poster, she is grabbing his shoulder, which would be anatomically impossible from her position. For the 2024 20th anniversary release, her arm was removed from the poster entirely. I've seen this and it's actually nowhere near as bad as they make it seem. Like, you don't even think about it. Like, that's the thing. And then for an IMDb nugget, near the end of the movie, Doc Ock, played by Alfred Molina, says, "I will not die a monster." Later, in Monsters University from 2013, he plays Professor Knight, a monster. And I'm like, hey guy, maybe just realize that sometimes you don't need to submit a trivia item if it's that stupid. All right, on to info and ratings. Opening weekend, 88.2 million. Worldwide gross, 785.4 million. IMDb rating 7.5. Letterboxd rating 3.9. Rotten Tomato critics score 93%. Rotten Tomato audience score 82%. Personal rating 5 out of 5 stars. I know you don't believe me, but it's really true. Praise for this movie. I really do love the effects and all of the action sequences throughout the film. I think it truly has a great comic book movie plot, and they managed to keep it exciting. This one is considered one of the all-time great comic book movies for a reason, and it doesn't go crazy with the higher stakes aspects that tend to get overblown in sequels, like when I was talking about Die Hard 2 last episode. Criticism, my only real major gripe, obviously I pointed out like issues, but not like major issues throughout the plot, but like the one thing I don't like is, although I wouldn't hold it against the movie itself, the loss of Spider-Man's powers was poorly defined and inconsistent. It seemed like he should have either lost his powers completely or just opted to step down from being Spider-Man, not both. All right, everyone, thank you for stopping by. This was a long one. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
I'm here to welcome you